Have you ever watched your neighborhood disappear while still standing in it? The bakery that knew your name, the mural that told your story, the block that raised you, quietly erased, one citation at a time. If you've ever felt like your memories were being priced out or your roots paved over for someone else's vision, then this story is for you. They say when something dies, it leaves a sound, a scream, a sigh, a silence that folds the air inward like a bruise. But when a neighborhood dies, it leaves paperwork. The day I found the document, the sky outside the cafe window was a pale, uncaring blue. Tourists walked past in matching linen hats, snapping pictures of cracked bricks they'd call charming later. I was behind the counter, wiping yesterday's syrup off a coffee machine older than me, when the leak hit the community forum. A PDF, barely disguised, dumped by an anonymous account named Urban Whistle. No password, no encryption, just a file sitting there with all the elegance of a loaded gun on a dinner plate. Neighborhood lifespan. Projection, Casa Roja District, 5 to 7 years until full redevelopment. My thumb trembled over the screen as I scrolled through maps, red lines, proposed zoning revisions, condemnation lists, development priority tiers. There was no poetry in the wording, just bureaucratic steel. Block numbers, tax codes, projected market yield. Every building had a timeline, every tenant, a cost-benefit ratio, every life here, a line item. That morning, I made 46 lattes, swept up shattered glass from a kid's tantrum, and read our eviction in Arial 12-point font. No one even tipped. When my shift ended, I didn't go home. I walked down Calle Mendez, past Dottie's soul food spot, where she was peeling collard greens with her headphones in. I almost didn't stop, until I saw the yellow paper fluttering in her window like a fevered flag, citation, improper signage. Dottie hadn't changed that sign in 12 years. It was hand-painted by her grandson after he got out of juvie and tried to do right by Grandma. It still read, Dottie's Kitchen, food for the soul and souls who've been through it. I kept walking. 2 blocks down, I passed the old wall where 3 generations had painted a mural of Puerto Rican revolutionaries, flames rising behind them, hands lifted in protest and prayer. My uncle's signature was still at the base, or had been. The wall was gray now, just gray, like someone had pressure-washed a memory. That was when the nausea hit. It wasn't the sight of what had been taken, it was the silence it left behind. The city hadn't demolished Casa Roja with wrecking balls. They had erased us with clipboards. I walked until my feet ached and my vision blurred. Then I turned the corner onto El Segundo and saw her, my abuela, arms dusted in flour, standing outside her panaderia, with the oven door propped open and her eyes set like flint. There was a notice taped beside her. Code violation, faulty ventilation system. She didn't say a word when she saw me, just nodded toward the bowl of dough beside her and motioned for me to knead. I obeyed, slipping my hands into the elastic resistance of flour and water. It grounded me, for a minute, maybe less. I saw it, I said finally. The projection. 5 years, 7, tops. They have us scheduled like we're a funeral procession waiting for the hearse. Abuela didn't stop kneading. Her hands moved with the rhythm of someone who had outlived curfews and kernels and collapsing ceilings. She was the kind of woman who spoke with her silence and made men afraid of it. They don't want to fix us, I said louder now. They want to replace us. She didn't lift her head, just pressed her knuckles into the dough like she was breaking its spine. Then let them try, mijo, she said calmly. I still know the recipe. Her voice cracked something open in me. Maybe it was the ease of it, the steadiness. Or maybe it was the fact that I didn't feel steady anymore. I had always been the quiet one, the observer. I told myself that filming for film school didn't count as resistance, that being behind the lens meant I wasn't part of the story. But something shifted then, standing in front of a taped-up notice and a woman who had fed an entire block on broken ovens and borrowed time. I wasn't just angry. I was awake. Later that night, I sat in the cramped corner of my apartment with a second-hand laptop that wheezed when it booted. I opened old editing software. My fingers hovered above the keyboard, unsure. I didn't have a plan. Just rage and fragments of footage. Abuela kneading, Dottie humming over greens, kids playing next to boarded windows. I stitched them together, added the headline, "This is not blight, it's a home," and hit upload. The screen didn't explode. The internet did. Int throw parades. It got 7 likes, 1 share. But something in me had already ruptured. I lay back on the mattress that counted as my bed and stared at the ceiling like it owed me answers. That's when the memory came. The first time I ever held a camera was after Hurricane Inez tore through the neighborhood. I was 9. The streets were waterlogged, the houses worse, but Abuela had handed me her old Polaroid and told me, "Show them what didn't break." Even now, I could hear the click of that shutter. The way it captured a boy balancing a bag of arroz over his head, smiling despite the storm. How my neighbor Mrs. Cruz sat on her stoop with her cat, feet submerged in ankle-deep water, sipping tea like royalty. That photo made the school paper. Got pinned to the principal's board. It wasn't much, but people saw, and they remembered. Maybe that was the answer. They called this place a dying district. I saw it every day in the way people clutched their bags tighter near us, in how newspapers ran obituaries disguised as editorials, in how the city walked with blueprints instead of apologies. But what if we wrote our own eulogy and refused to die in it? That night, I pulled out my DSLR, its battery taped in place, its lens slightly scratched. I stared through it like I was seeing Casa Roja for the first time. No, not seeing, witnessing. And I wasn't going to blink. The first time I hit record, my voice shook so much I had to mute the audio. It wasn't a speech. I wasn't standing on some soapbox or shouting into a bullhorn. I was just filming my abuela making café bustelo in our drafty kitchen, the way she always did. Metal kettle on the back burner, steam fogging the cracked tile behind her. She used a dish rag instead of a mitt, never flinched at the heat. Her hands moved with that quiet confidence, the kind that said, "They've taken a lot, but they don't get this." The video was barely edited. I added subtitles because the mic was shot and the pot hissed too loud. Titled it, "How to Brew Memory, the Real Way." I posted it on a whim between shifts. 7 likes, no comments. But the silence wasn't discouraging. It was familiar. Silence was how every story here started. But I didn't want ours to end that way. After the projection document, something in me refused to stay still. I started carrying my DSLR everywhere. Not just to the panaderia or Dottie's soul food counter, but to the corners people tried not to look at. The broken hydrant where kids still played in the spray like it was a theme park. The stairwell in my building where someone had written in chipped red Sharpie, "Still home." And the rat-infested duplex on Donnelly Street with "Coming Soon, Urban Elegance," spray-painted on its plywood siding like a joke no one here asked to hear. I filmed that one out of pure spite, gave it a fake real estate listing voiceover, called it "The Chateau on Donnelly, Grit You Can't Manufacture." I panned slowly over exposed wiring, dead cockroaches, and the crusted-over remains of a toilet bowl that hadn't seen water in a year. I added jazz music in the background. It was petty. It was sarcastic. It was everything I wasn't allowed to say out loud in meetings, letters, or forms. And it exploded. The video was shared by some local satire page, then reposted by a community journalist who called it guerrilla media with bite. Within 3 days, I had over 10,000 views. Strangers commented things like, "This is genius," and "Finally someone saying it how it is." One user wrote, "I thought this was going to be comedy, but it broke my heart." That comment stuck to me like heat, because I wasn't trying to be funny, I was trying not to scream. I named the channel The Real Casa Roja the night after. The name came to me while folding laundry at the 24-hour laundromat on 7th. The one with peeling walls and a vending machine that only gave you Cheetos, no matter what button you pressed. I sat there with my headphones in, editing raw footage on my wheezing laptop, trying to sync audio that refused to behave. Every time I hit a glitch, I reminded myself, "You're not doing this for a grade. You're doing it because nobody else will." I remembered my old film school professor, the one who told me I had a decent eye but not enough polish. He said I should stick to editing or maybe wedding gigs. I left that school with debt, 3 unfinished scripts, and a thesis project that got rejected for being too political. It was called 3 Stops Past Gentrification, a documentary that never got funding, just pity claps at a community screening. Now I was back here. No diploma, no grants, no press badge, just footage and fury. But I had something more important than polish. I had people. Like Dottie, who let me film her prepping for lunch rush, tossing okra into flour and laughing about how the city fined her for signs when rats run your subway like a mafia. Or Kareem, the street musician on Marlowe, who'd been playing saxophone since before I was born. He told me, "They say my music's too loud, but funny how the condos ain't too quiet when they throwing rooftop parties." I gave them the screen, I gave them the mic, and for once, someone watched. The real Casa Roja wasn't fancy. It was stitched together in laundromats and borrowed cafes with free Wi-Fi. I shot on used gear, mixed audio in apps not meant for sound design, and captioned everything by hand because half my neighbors didn't watch with sound. But the stories were ours, raw, unglossed, real. And then came Nessie. I'd heard her name whispered around block meetings like an urban legend. They said she'd filed more injunctions than some lawyers, that she kept eviction notices stacked like old letters in milk crates beneath her bed, that she once got a slumlord's license revoked using only a Polaroid camera and a binder full of witness statements. I didn't know what I expected when I knocked on her apartment door. Maybe a tired old woman with too many opinions and no time for kids like me. Instead, I met a storm in sneakers, hair in a bun so tight it looked like it was holding in curses, eyes sharp enough to slice red tape. She let me in after 5 minutes of interrogation. I told her about the channel, about the rat tour video, about the comments. She sat back in her kitchen chair, arms crossed over a faded tenant rights tee. "You think they'll listen to some barista with a cracked laptop?" she asked. I met her stare, didn't flinch. "No," I said, "but they'll listen to the views." She smiled, crooked and slow. "Then I guess it's time to go viral with vengeance." That was the first night I realized I didn't need to be a journalist. I didn't need permission to tell the truth. I just needed to make it too loud to ignore. As I packed up my camera, Nessie handed me a folder, old eviction threats, red-lined maps, and a photograph of a building that didn't exist anymore, the Si Manin. Caption scrawled across the bottom read, "Proof we existed." And maybe that's all the real Casa Roja ever was, a proof of existence. Not a brand, not a business, a heartbeat, broadcast before they could silence it. I stepped into the night with that folder in my bag and her words echoing in my ear. We didn't survive this long just to be footnotes. And I promised myself then, neither would I. The email came wrapped in compliments. Subject line, exciting collaboration opportunity. Body, glowing reviews of my channel, name-dropped my most viral video, praised my authentic tone and community engagement. And then buried 3 paragraphs down, like a roach tucked into a wedding cake. Alta Dev Group is eager to explore a content partnership that uplifts both local narratives and future growth initiatives. I read it 3 times, then sat back in the flickering light of my monitor, letting the words sour on my tongue. Future growth initiatives. That was their way of saying bulldozers with brochures. At first, I didn't delete it. I left it there, blinking in my inbox like a dare. Because if I'm being honest, really honest, there was a moment I considered it. Not because I believed them, but because I was tired. Tired of editing between shifts, of broken audio, of nights spent rendering video on a laptop that screamed like it was dying. Tired of knowing I could reach more people if I had the backing, the bandwidth, the money. And for a few hours, I let the fantasy bloom. A better mic, studio lighting, maybe even rent paid on time. No more hustling free Wi-Fi or bartering with old classmates for sound cleanup. Just storytelling, with funding. But then I opened the attached proposal. Help us ease transition for legacy residents. That line, just that line, it stopped me cold. Legacy. That was their word for people like Abuela, like Dottie, like Nessie. People who fed this neighborhood with their bare hands, who kept the lights on with stubbornness and borrowed extension cords, who raised entire generations in buildings older than most of the investors' portfolios. Legacy, in developer speak, didn't mean honored. It meant expired. They weren't trying to amplify my voice. They were trying to soften it, dilute it, wrap it in a bow, and sell it as proof that the community approved of what they were about to do. I shut my laptop so hard the corner cracked. That night, I walked to Nessie's building without texting ahead. It was almost midnight, but her window glowed like a vigil. She opened the door in a housecoat and a bandana tied like a battlefield banner. She didn't look surprised, just motioned for me to sit and handed me tea that smelled like rust and resistance. I showed her the email, watched her expression twist like a storm front. "You know what legacy means in developer speak?" she asked, voice low, eyes sharp. "Deadweight, ghosts, us." I stared down at my chipped mug. They said they wanted to partner, help elevate local voices. "Translation?" she scoffed. "Control the narrative, buy the organ grinder so the monkey stops screaming." Silence stretched between us, thick with dust and dim light and everything we couldn't afford to say aloud. Then I leaned forward, voice tighter than I meant it to be. "Then we haunt them, until we're too loud to bury." That was the moment something in her changed. A tilt of the chin, a flicker in her eyes like a lighter catching flame. She pulled out a box from beneath her kitchen table, worn cardboard, corners frayed, and dumped the contents on the floor. Eviction noted, seize. Building permits. Complaints filed. Fines. Photos. Emails printed and annotated. Names circled in red. Names I recognized from city council and glossy brochures and foundation galas that advertised urban uplift. "This isn't a scrapbook," Nessie said. "It's an arsenal." She didn't ask if I was ready. She already knew. And I think, maybe, I'd always been. A week later, she introduced me to Darius. We met behind the rec center, in a patch of alley that still smelled like summer sweat and spray paint. He wore a respirator mask pulled halfway down his neck and a hoodie dotted with color like camouflage for the kind of war we were fighting. The wall he was working on used to be a utility box. Now it was a heartbeat, crimson letters stretching across the metal like veins. Still here. He didn't stop painting as I approached, just nodded and kept filling in the lines of a silhouette. A woman holding a child, back turned, facing down a row of wrecking balls painted in grayscale. "I know your videos," he said, voice muffled. "You're the one who made mold fashionable." I smirked. "You're the one turning public works into protest." He finished the last stroke, stepped back, looked at me with a challenge in his eyes. "You gonna film this?" "I already am." It was instinct by then, camera in hand, light adjusted, sound rolling. But this time, it felt different. Like I wasn't just documenting injustice. I was documenting defiance. And not just mine. Darius didn't paint to decorate. He painted to disturb. His murals weren't requests. They were ultimatums. Later that night, I edited the footage back at Nessie's with her old cat curled at my feet and city reports scattered across the floor. I laid the audio over slow-motion shots of the mural, Darius's voice layered like an oath. "They call this neighborhood a zone, a tier, a statistic, but you know what I see?" Cut to the mural. I see memory made visible. The video dropped at dawn. By lunch, it had over 30,000 views. The comments were different this time. Not just sympathy, strategy, lawyers offering pro bono, architects volunteering time, former residents asking how to help from across the country. I didn't respond to AltaDev's email, never wrote back, never explained. I didn't owe them a justification for choosing survival over silence. Instead, I started building something with people who didn't need a contract to care. Nessie had her milk crates and a Rolodex of fury. Darius had his walls and his pigment of protest. And I had the lens. Together, we didn't need permission. We had something better. We had proof. And proof, when wielded right, was louder than a press release. It started with a single wall. Just one. a slab of forgotten brick behind the bus depot, half crumbling and covered in the remnants of faded ads for rent-to-own furniture. Darius showed up with a red can and a ladder at sunrise. I watched from the sidewalk, breath fogging in the cool morning air, as he dipped his brush in and carved 3 words that cut deeper than anything I'd ever filmed. Still here. It was sloppy, rushed, too bold for the space it occupied, like it didn't care if it bled past the edges. And that was the point. The paint was the color of sirens and wounds, unapologetic, alive. I remember whispering, more to myself than to him. It looks like a heartbeat. Darius, wait. Pet his hands on his hoodie and stepped back. It's not a mural, he said. It's a defibrillator. The next night, the same words appeared on the shuttered door of an old grocery store, then on the plywood covering what used to be the neighborhood pharmacy. By the end of the week, 10 buildings had been marked, 10 bodies exhumed from the graveyard of city planning. People started noticing. Some clapped, some cried, some complained. This is vandalism, the city said in a statement. No, Darius replied on camera, mid-stroke, the brush dripping red. This is memory in wet paint. The clip went viral in under 12 hours. It was reposted with the caption, "Graffiti or Gospel," by an indie news outlet that usually only covered skate culture and late-night food trucks. Suddenly, journalists wanted to know who we were, not because they cared about the art, but because it was trending. We didn't let them frame it. We filmed our own interviews, our own walkthroughs. I stitched footage of Darius painting with audio of old residents telling stories about their mother's first jobs, about weddings held in church basements, about the sounds the pipes made in the winter before the city ever considered us worth heeding. But not all our allies came from memory. Some came from exile. That's how I met Raj. He messaged the channel under a burner name first, just said, "Saw your tour of Donnelly Street. My family used to live above the corner store before the flood repairs kicked us out. You've got something real. Want help making it louder?" At first I was cautious. I'd already seen what happened when people tried to co-opt our message and sell it back to us in digestible bites. But Raj wasn't selling. He was offering code, whole strings of it, scripts for metadata boosting, geolocation tagging, and a ghost site that would track redevelopment permits and tie them to anonymous LLCs. We met in person at the park. He wore a patched leather jacket and carried a laptop that looked like it had been through a revolution. His voice was calm, clipped, like someone who'd had to explain justice too many times to people who thought equity was a brand. "I don't want credit," he said. "I want teeth. This thing you're building, it needs bite." We started with a joke. A parody review site, gentrifyme.com. The homepage featured a mock real estate ad for a café called Displacement Roasters with a tagline, "Serving espresso and eviction with every pour." Each listing was rated not by coffee quality, but by how fast it raised rent on the block. A latte to landlord index, Raj called it. People laughed, then people shared. Then someone sent us screenshots from a real investor group chat joking about how they didn't want to open near anything with more than 2 red tags. We posted those too. But humor wasn't enough. Not anymore. Because every day, I walked past more notices, more scaffolding, more holes where homes used to be. The city didn't speak in words. It spoke in silence, quiet demolitions and expedited permits and press releases that sounded like apologies but landed like eulogies. And yet, the walls kept talking back. Still here spread like fire. Darius taught teens how to layer shadow, how to use rust as texture, how to blend protest with pigment. It wasn't just him anymore. It was a collective, a visual uprising. Even Nessie, who called technology the devil's hallway, started printing out high-res images of the murals and taping them to court filings. "This isn't art," she told me one night. "This is evidence." There was a moment, just one, that I let myself feel the hope behind the momentum. I was walking past a block they once marked for emergency redevelopment, and instead of a bulldozer, I saw a group of kids tracing outlines in chalk, sketching a mother and child, just like Darius had. One kid looked up at me and asked, "Miss, do you know what this says?" I nodded. "It says we're still here, right?" he asked. "It does," I whispered. "It really does." But hope is fragile. and every revolution breeds its warning. The following week, one of Darius's walls was painted over in white. Just white, sterile, loud in its blankness. No notice, no permission, just erasure, and it hit harder than a citation. Because you can't protest what doesn't admit it existed. That night, Darius sat on the curb, brush in hand, face tight. He didn't cry, he didn't speak. He just dipped the brush in again and walked to the next wall. I followed him with the camera. We didn't have the luxury of mourning, only of marking. Still here, still here, still here, over and over again until the city bled red trying to silence it. The cease and desist came at 3:17 a.m. I was up, half asleep in the glow of my editing screen, syncing subtitles over Raj's latest code map, a visual of property flips plotted like sniper fire across Casa Roca. The subject line read, "Immediate legal action pending. Unauthorized use of private property imagery." The sender? A firm I'd never heard of, but one whose address matched a skyscraper downtown with mirrored glass and no soul. The language was cold, clinical. Defamatory representations. Violation of property rights. Inciting public hostility. I reread the sentence that made my stomach turn. Failure to comply may result in permanent injunction. They didn't call it censorship, they called it enforcement. But I knew what it meant. I wasn't being warned, I was being leashed. I didn't close the email, I forwarded it to Nessie. She called me 2 hours later. "They tagged my building," she said. "No hello, no breath wasted. Structural instability, emergency notice." I froze. "Your foundation's solid." "I know," she snapped. "But they filed the paperwork, and in this city, paperwork screams louder than protest." By noon, there were yellow notices taped on every door in her building. A man in a hard hat snapped photos like he was cataloging bodies, not homes. Nessie stood on the front steps with her arms crossed, eviction letters fanned out in her hands like war medals. "This is a paper eviction," she said to the camera. My camera, mine now shaking slightly. Not because the building's broken, but because we're inconvenient. And then it escalated. Darius had gone back to the corner of Huron and 6th. The wall there was wide, raw, and already tagged with development markers. It faced what used to be his apartment building before the holding company claimed abandonment and gutted it from the inside out. He wasn't doing anything flashy, just adding a final silhouette, a mother holding her child, facing down the wreckage with open arms. The color was richer than usual, deeper. It looked like it had been bled into the brick rather than painted on. I was filming from across the street, capturing the tension in real time, pedestrians slowing to watch, a woman nodding solemnly from a bus window, the glint of light off the blade of Darius's brush. Then the sirens. I thought they'd pass. They always passed. But this time they didn't. The cruiser pulled up fast. No lights, just speed and threat. 2 officers jumped out, hands already twitching near holsters. Darius didn't move. He didn't run. He just lowered the brush, palms open, eyes steady. And still, they grabbed him. They slammed him to the ground like he was a warning, not a man. His head hit the sidewalk with a dull crack that I still hear in my ribs. One cop's knee pinned his back while the other yanked the paintbrush from his grip. It clattered across the pavement, spinning, then rolled back toward the mural. Blood smeared onto the wall, right across the child's face. My hands were frozen around the camera. I didn't speak, didn't move. I just filmed. Because if I looked away, they'd win. And if I didn't capture this exact moment, then the mural would die silent. The video uploaded before he even made it to the precinct. I didn't add a voiceover, no text, just raw footage. Darius on the ground, the mural bleeding, bystanders shouting, sirens in the distance like the city laughing. By sunset, it had 3 million views. By morning, 10. Hashtags bloomed like wildflowers. Still Here trended alongside #red paint red blood. Influencers who never once said Casa Roja's name reposted the clip with heart emojis and calls for justice. Some meant it, most didn't. But it didn't matter. The silence had cracked. We had screamed too loud to be ignored. I found Nessie sitting on the hood of her neighbor's car, smoking like it was strategy. "They think if they knock down our walls, we'll go quiet," I said, still shaking, still trying to catch up to the weight of what I'd just witnessed. She took a drag, then exhaled like an accusation. "Nah," she said. "Some of us shout louder from the rubble." I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. But all I could see was Darius's blood on the brick, drying in the shape of something sacred and unfinished. The next day, I walked back to that wall. They'd painted over the mural, white, flat, sterile, like a blank page meant to shame you for ever writing. I stood there for a long time, staring at the erasure. It felt like standing over a fresh grave. I didn't cry. I filmed. And this time, I added my voice. "You painted over a man's pain," I said, low and even, as the camera zoomed in on the whitewash. "But pain stains, and memory leaks. You can't cover what bleeds." I ended with a still frame, the original mural, captured mid-process, the mother's arms outstretched, red letters beneath her feet. Still here. That clip didn't go viral. It detonated. By midnight, protests had begun. Not organized, just raw. People lit candles at the foot of that wall. Kids drew in chalk what had been erased. Someone taped a sign where the mural used to be. It read, "If art is illegal, what do we call injustice?" No one had an answer, but everyone started asking. And maybe that was the start of something we hadn't seen yet. Not noise, not rage, something deeper. Echo. The day we launched the fake press conference, the sky over Casa Roja was flat and gray, the kind of color that makes buildings look like gravestones. But inside Nessie's apartment, the air buzzed like static. Raj sat cross-legged on the floor, wires trailing from his laptop like veins, tapping at the keyboard with the calm of someone building a bomb, not to destroy, but to reveal. "This code's tighter than any of their livestream protocols," he muttered, not even looking up. "It'll intercept their scheduled broadcast and replace it for exactly 3 hours. That's all I need." I nodded, even though half of what he said blurred past my understanding. What I did understand, what clenched tight in my chest like a secret waiting to detonate, was what we were about to do. The city had announced their Casa Roja revitalization initiative a week after Darius was arrested. There were renderings, glass towers, rooftop gardens, smiling stock photo families sipping lattes in parks that used to be basketball courts. The press conference was scheduled for Tuesday, 9 a.m. sharp, and we were going to hijack it. Nessie stood by the window, arms crossed, eyes narrow. Her voice was low, even, razor sharp. "They want a story that sells. Let's give them one that doesn't shut up." The video we produced was simple, deliberately so. Raj deep-faked the mayor's voice, just enough to mimic cadence and speech patterns, without stepping into parody. No satire, just truth disguised as confession. "I want to be transparent," the mayor's digital twin said into the camera. "We prioritized investor interests over resident stability. We offered tax breaks to developers while local families were evicted. We called it revitalization, but what we meant was replacement." No music, no sound effects, just silence at the end, like the screen itself was holding its breath. It went live at 8:57 a.m. By 9:04, it had 1.2 million views. The city's real press conference didn't even make it past the intro. Reporters pulled out their phones mid-briefing. Comments exploded. Screenshots raced across platforms with captions like, "Mayor admits to displacement plot," and "Casa Roja fights back with Reese." IPTS. We didn't clarify, we didn't deny. We just moved on to phase 2. Banners. Raj had designed them, but it was Nessie's idea to print them large enough to cover entire facades. I remember the night we wrapped the old bodega on Valencia Street in vinyl that read, in bold serif font, future site of your $18 toast. It looked like a real developer ad, clean design, buzzwords in the corner, open concept, curated vibes, quietly erased history. We covered 4 buildings in one night. The bakery that had closed after Abuela got fined out of compliance. The old library branch. Dottie's place, which she agreed to with a chuckle and a frying pan in hand. They want this street sanitized? She said. Let's give them bleach with a message. The next morning, news vans swarmed, and that was exactly what we needed, for attention to shift away from damage control and toward the one thing they couldn't control, proof of concept. Because while the city scrambled to find out who hacked their stream, we were finalizing something much harder to erase, a real proposal. 72 pages, drafted by local engineers, tenant lawyers, urban planners who'd grown up here before they were priced out. It wasn't a protest sign, it was policy. We proposed mixed income co-ops with equity stakes for residents, a reinvestment of property taxes back into neighborhood infrastructure, language access in every permit process, rent-to-own models, legacy protections. We printed it ourselves, 3 bound copies with a crimson cover stamped, the Casa Roja Alternative Plan. I held it in my hands the way you'd hold a newborn. Not because it was fragile, but because it carried weight. Lives, names, futures that refused to disappear. On the morning of the council session, I wore my only blazer and scuffed boots and walked into City Hall with Dottie on one arm and Raj on the other. Nessie waited outside, holding her eviction folder like a briefcase of war. The council chambers were stale and clinical, ringed with screens and eyes that scanned like scanners. I stepped to the podium, took a breath. They tell stories with bulldozers, I whispered into the mic. Good thing we write better endings. The silence that followed wasn't quiet, it was charged, alert. We handed in the plan, walked out slow. And for the first time since I'd picked up a camera in grief, I felt the unfamiliar weight of possibility. Not victory, not yet. But a shift. As we stood on the steps, someone shouted from across the plaza, "Is this for real?" I turned, stared into the crowd that had gathered. Some strangers, some neighbors, some who had only known Casa Roja as a name on a map. "It's real because we made it," I said, "and we're not done." Later that night, I sat on the rooftop above my building, watching the lights of downtown blur into each other like false promises. My camera was off. My hands finally still. For a moment. Because I knew the fight wasn't over. They could come back. They always did. But this time, we weren't reacting. We were plotting. I found out Altadev had pulled out of Casa Roja not from an official announcement, but from a news tide, here at the bottom of a muted television screen in the corner of a donut shop. I stood there, a jelly-filled pastry half raised to my mouth, staring at the scrolling text like it was a hallucination. Altadev Group announces strategic redirection, withdraws from proposed Casa Roja redevelopment. No press release, no apology, just that. Outside, the city was already waking up in its usual ways, bus brakes hissing, shop shutters rolling upward like heavy sighs, pigeons tearing at yesterday's breadcrumbs. But something about the air had changed, like it was finally listening. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I just walked back to Nessie's apartment and told her. She didn't blink, just lit a cigarette and stared out the window. "Cowards blinked first," she said. "They didn't blink," I replied. "They calculated. And right now, we cost too much." And that's what it came down to. Not justice, not reform. Cost. Later that afternoon, the city council released a statement of their own. They were opening the floor to community-led proposals under a new public hearing initiative titled Community Alternatives for Growth. Growth, that word again, dressed in different clothing, still shaped like a boot. But it was something. For once, the city wasn't speaking alone. It was echoing back what we'd forced into the public square. News outlets that once labeled Casa Roja as a district in decline were now using words like resistance and reclamation. One column even called Darius's murals a visual revolution. He snorted when he read it. Funny how blood becomes aesthetic once it dries. Still, the footage kept playing. Our footage. The live stream Raj captured of us handing over the proposal had been clipped and re-uploaded more times than I could count, different voices dubbing over my own, different headlines framing the same image, me at the podium, holding 72 pages of survival. I watched that video more times than I'll admit, not because I liked seeing myself, but because I couldn't believe how steady my voice had been when my hands were trembling like they didn't belong to me. That day, I dressed in what passed for formal in my closet. Black jeans, a faded blazer, a pin with Abuela's bakery logo fastened to my lapel like armor. I remember the elevator ride up to City Hall, my palms sweating through a folder, my heart pounding like it was trying to get out. Raj had looked at me sideways and said, "You okay?" I wanted to lie, but instead I said, "I don't know if they'll listen." He'd smiled, not unkindly. "They don't have to. They just have to look." And they did. For once, they looked. I stood at the podium, words flowing not from memory, but from the marrow of who I'd become. "This isn't a compromise, it's a correction. You've been building over us instead of with us, and we've brought you a blueprint, not for profit, but for permanence." And then we handed the plan over. My hands had trembled the whole time, but my voice, somehow, stayed steady, like it belonged to every person who couldn't be in that room, like it was borrowed from ghosts and grandmothers. That image, me, the plan, the silence, circulated through the news cycle like a dare. No one called it a win, but they called it undeniable. Back in Casa Roja, we walked slower now, not because we were safe, but because we'd claimed visibility. For the first time in months, the murals weren't being scrubbed off, the vinyl banners stayed up, and someone had left a note on Dottie's door that read, "I didn't know until you showed me." Small things. Fragments. But resistance doesn't always roar. Sometimes it lingers. Still, I didn't let myself get comfortable. I knew better. Every victory without vigilance turns into a story someone else finishes. And I wasn't done writing. That night, I sat with Raj on the roof of my building, staring at the skyline. The city still glowed the same way, still coughed smog and light and entitlement. But for once, the glow didn't feel so distant. He nudged me gently. "We stopped them." I shook my head. "No," I said. "We made them look. That's not the same thing, but it's something." Below us, Nessie was talking to a reporter, her eviction letters spread like tarot cards on a folding table. Darius was painting again, a new mural, this one of a tree growing out of concrete, its roots shaped like the faces of old tenants. And somewhere behind it all, I could still hear Abuela's voice, steady as ever. "Then let them try, mijo. I still know the recipe." I closed my eyes and whispered back, "So do I." This wasn't a happy ending. Not yet. But it was a line break. A breath. A pause. And sometimes, that's all you need to rewrite the next chapter. I always thought legacy came with age. Gray hair, grandkids, a plaque on a wall somewhere. I never imagined it would come with paint-streaked fingers, sleepless edits, or eviction letters stapled to the front doors of homes with names carved into their stoops. But legacy isn't what you inherit. It's what you refuse to surrender. The real Casa Roja wasn't just a channel anymore. It had become something heavier, rooted. A digital community center, a field guide, a warning shot. We didn't just upload videos, we archived proof. Legal walkthroughs, mural documentaries, housing templates, tenant guides. The comment sections had turned into forums. Strangers became contributors. A girl from Detroit sent us blueprints for a modular co-op model. An old man in Atlanta mailed us a check with the words, "For ink and truth," scribbled in the memo line. People started arriving in person too, not gentrifiers or gawkers, but volunteers, engineers, carpenters, teachers. And with them, Abuela's Café reopened. The code violations had been fixed with hands, not permits. The cracked vent was replaced by a donated hood from a closed restaurant across town. Someone patched the awning. Someone else repainted the name in gold. The morning she unlocked the doors again, the line outside wrapped around the block. People clapped when the lights flickered on. Dottie cried when someone brought a cake that said, "Still here" in icing. And for the first time in months, I let myself exhale. Across the street, Darius's mural still stood, untouched, a rare silence from the city, maybe from shame, maybe from strategy. But the paint was preserved, protected now by a legal petition filed by Raj and signed by thousands. They couldn't whitewash this one, not without making a spectacle. When I saw school kids sketching it on clipboards during what looked like an unofficial field trip, I had to walk away before I cried. But it wasn't just about preservation. We were building again. New proposals were being submitted, real ones, not dreams, but documented, budgeted plans with zoning requests and sustainability models. And this time, the names on the bottom weren't developers or firms that ended in capital. They were ours. Dottie Morales, Darius M. Flores, Nessie M. Torres, and me, Javi Marisol Santiago, barista, filmmaker, unlicensed, underqualified, unafraid. I stood outside the city planning office with the folder in hand, the same crimson color as our first plan, the real Casa Roja logo pressed in matte on the front. My fingers didn't shake when I handed it in. My voice didn't crack when I said, "This is an addendum, because we're not done." We'd claimed more than property. We'd claimed authorship. People always talk about changing the narrative like it's a slogan, a trend. But I know now it's a war of inches. A battle fought in captions and council rooms and community potlucks where everyone argues over which memory to preserve and ends up laughing over the same flame. And I know this, if they ever come back for us, and they will, they won't find a neighborhood waiting to be erased. They'll find a story mid-sentence. I walked back through the streets of Casa Roja that afternoon, my camera slung over my shoulder but powered off. I didn't need it. Not today. Raj was sitting on the curb, fixing a QR code sign we'd printed for the café, linking to housing rights resources. "Someone peeled it off again," he muttered, holding it up. "Then tape it down twice," I said, "and make it waterproof." We both laughed, the kind of laugh that knows exhaustion but doesn't surrender to it. At dusk, I went live. No script, no edits, just my face and the streets behind me glowing in orange twilight. "You can buy the building," I said into the lens, "but not the story inside it." I paused, let the silence wrap around the words like ribbon. "Because this one?" I smiled. "This one's told by us." I ended the stream there. No music, no CTA, just truth. They'll write about Casa Roja again one day, maybe in textbooks, maybe in redevelopment case studies, maybe in angry blog posts from displaced executives. But whatever they write, they'll never claim the first draft, because we already published it. This story already has a narrator. And it's not for sale. Let's be honest, sometimes the fight isn't loud. It's you, exhausted, just trying to hold on to what little still feels like home. And most days, it feels easier to give in, to stay quiet, to tell yourself it's not worth pushing back. But here's what I've learned. They count on that silence. They plan around it. You don't have to be fearless. You just have to be awake. A little more awake today than you were yesterday. This story isn't just about one neighborhood. It's about all the small places they assume no one will defend. So tell me, in your life, what's worth defending even if no one else sees the value in? Let's talk in the comments, and if this made you feel less alone, stay. Subscribe. Because stories like ours deserve to take up space too.